The moment you've been waiting for has finally come, ladies and gentlemen. We finally get to hear Pica talk in this week's episode. And just as I imagined it in the manga version, it's pretty freaking hilarious. Make sure to stay tuned at the very end of this review to check out my quickfire review of The Rolling Girls episodes 7 and 8. So aside from the fact that Pica has a hilarious voice and he's basically completely destroying the very foundations of Dressrosa, I think another welcome surprise of this week's episode was getting to see a surprise fight with Luffy and Zoro going up against Fujitora, which I thought was really well animated and honestly was a great way to start this week's episode, which was just plain badass to say the least. I especially love the fact that there was actually good animation in that scene, even when Zoro was using his sword choreography, and Fujitora is just so annoyingly powerful, but their battle ultimately is interrupted when Pica does make his grand entrance. And grand it is, but before they get to that, there is a little bit of build-up, mostly with Usopp and the crew running through Kurita Coliseum trying to evade the Marines and everybody else who's trying to capture them and get their bounties. And there is this one recurring joke where they constantly keep dropping Usopp, which is also pretty clever. But let's get real. Let's talk about Pica. This guy is awesome. This is basically the real formal introduction of the character. Before, he's just always sort of been in the shadows and he's had no speaking roles. But there is a recurring joke about this character. Obviously, his voice does not match the way he looks at all. And whenever he talks, there's always somebody in the crowd who starts laughing. And that completely pisses him off to the point where Baby 5 actually ends up taking out one of the guys who was laughing by transforming her leg into a Gatling gun. Pretty awesome. Doflamingo also reveals some pretty crucial information about his personal family. He actually asks some of the other goons, do they have a family that they love, that they cherish? And he mentions that he actually lost his mother and even killed his father. It's only a matter of time before we get into that Doflamingo backstory. But the grand moment of the episode is definitely when Pica finally starts to erupt through the ground, and it looks really good. The artwork here in particular is fantastic, and I especially love how the scene is paced because it's incredibly ominous. At first, you see all of the buildings crumbling as he's rising into the sky, citizens falling and dying, and then suddenly he shows himself, and the minute he speaks, Luffy and Zoro just start busting out laughing, and it destroys the entire epicness of the scene. Despite that, Pica decides to fight back with one massive punch, and this is when you actually realize that Pica is the largest opponent that we have ever seen in the One Piece series. And that's saying a lot, because this is a series that actually has giants in it, and I think the only other character who even came close to the size of this was probably Oars, but damn. The anime version, they do a great job of showing his size and weight and just showing how massive he is, especially in that final shot where he's getting ready to punch Luffy and destroy everything in sight, and everybody gets blown away right into the to-be-continued screen. So what's the rundown? On this week's episode of One Piece, this was a surprisingly exciting episode that had some really competent animation and artwork going for it. Luffy versus Fujitora was definitely a highlight at the beginning of the episode. Despite the fact that it was short-lived, it was really well animated and had some great artwork, and I loved that Zoro got in there and got some good hits in. That was just really satisfying. But this week's episode really just belongs to Pica. This is like his grand major introduction, and he is just a really great character. And I really find it great that his introduction was this week, because he had a very important role in this week's manga chapter as well, which, try to keep the spoilers to a minimum in the comment section below if you can, guys. But still, it was just really, really good timing. It allows me to like Pica even more. And there was just a lot of good animation and artwork cues this week, especially with Pica towards the end of the episode. Just the way his face looked, his glowing eyes. That always looks really awesome. And just all of like the big standing still stances, like that all has just really good artwork. This was just a really nice looking episode of One Piece. The middle part of the episode was a little slow, just mostly the same old shtick with the Tontada tribe running away, but it was kind of cool how Nico Robin was able to make this big spiderweb net, and Bartolomeo is still just getting a freaking hard-on just by working with them. In general, I think that's pretty funny. But again, this is just all about the Pica stuff this week, which is so freaking awesome. So if you've been following the manga series, you definitely know where the Pica story is going and who's actually going to be going up against him and all the different opponents he's going to be fighting. But Pica is definitely like the biggest element of this arc, who's like changing everything right now and like literally changing the landscape of freaking Dressrosa. It's insane. This was just a fun action episode. It wasn't a perfect episode by any stretch of the means. It was a little slow in some parts. Despite that, it was incredibly entertaining. So I'm going to give this week's episode a 4 out of 5. Check it out, guys. Another good episode of One Piece. I missed last week's episode of The Rolling Girls, so here is a double shot. Episode 7 and 8. My quick review of this really ridiculous two-parter that really ended on one hell of a high note. It's basically the battle between the Rockers and the Geishas in episodes 7 and 8 of the Rolling Girls. Oddly enough, the Rolling Girls themselves, yet again, sort of take a backseat in their own series. They're kind of like the Transformers in the Michael Bay movies. They're sort of like co-stars in their own show. That's not exactly a bad thing, as they're basically there to set up the story when we're introduced to these new characters, who always seem to go through some sort of existential life crisis, where they have to come to terms with the fact of who they are, what they want to do, and what their dreams really are. The real big story of this week's episode is that the Rolling Girls are looking for the pick of destiny. Not exactly the one from the Jack Black Kyle Gass movie, but that would be pretty freaking metal. Another thing that's really weird about this episode is that Chiaya turns into an octopus again. What's up with that? And it's a lot more easier to see in this week's episode. It's right in your face. Ultimately, my favorite thing about these two episodes of The Rolling Girls was the finale of episode 8, which has got to be the most epic concert I've ever seen in anime form. It featured guitar solos, dueling guitars with that weird ninja-y guitar thing. I'm not really sure what that thing is called, but it's awesome. And then they got lasers, which are firing at freaking big Buddha missiles. That's really happening. And it all ends with that one guy from that one clan who jumps up into the sky and does one of the most epic anime punches I've ever seen, which ends in a big fireworks explosion, all while the credits is going on, and it just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. It's not a perfect series. It's really, really beautiful to look at, and every once in a while it's got some pretty amazing action scenes. I'm still not quite sure what to feel about this series, because they're still not really revealing too much about the backstory. I mean, there's that one guy who supposedly was a member of that one band who's going around looking for all the stones, who's with Jaya's mother, but they're not revealing anything about that quite yet. And besides, this is all about a girl who can transform into an octopus and some weird shit, and they're not even talking about it. The Rolling Girls are in the background, but despite that, this is a gorgeous and very unique series that just makes you feel good inside, and it has some badass action scenes. So check it out, guys. These episodes are really good. I'm gonna give both of them a 4 out of 5. Check them out. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and like the video. And before you guys leave, please tell me what you thought about this week's episode of One Piece. And make sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. And make sure to also check out our brand new podcast show, The Powerful Nerdcast. There will be a link for that in the description box below.